For as much as mobile apps create convenience in our lives and make interacting and transacting easier, what happens when an app knows too much? A British thriller that originally aired on the BBC is now coming to Netflix. Is Red Rose enough to be your new binging addiction? A close-knit group of teens' friendships is infiltrated by the Red Rose app, which blooms on their smartphones, threatening them with dangerous consequences if they don't meet its demands. So, a movie or series that centers around a mobile app or website that wreaks havoc in its users' lives is not a brand new or novel idea. We've had some of those already. So, is there anything really that makes Red Rose stand out from the rest? Now, the first episode of this 8-episode season, it starts off kind of rough. We're shown a vague scene of someone feeling watched and tormented. Then the story flashes forward 6 months. We then follow a group of high schoolers who are beginning their summer break, and one of them receives a message to download this app called Red Rose. From there, bad things happen. And at first, the show feels like it's going to be a mix of the supernatural and high-tech genres. But what this becomes is pretty much what you'd expect it to be. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are visuals in this that appear to be troubling, but I think pretty quickly on what's creating the imagery is pretty obvious and straightforward. What I like about this series, though, despite the predictability and what's causing some of the chaos, is the mystery and the search that then begins as a result. The characters in this range from sympathetic and endearing to downright ridiculous and laughable. And that's exactly how I think they're meant to come across. In the core group of friends, while there are different personalities at play, like the thinker or the snarky one, or the one with empathy, or even the impulsive one, they all complement each other as a group, making the team as a whole worth rooting for, even if a character by themselves may not always be cheerworthy. But then there are those outside the group, and that's when the characters can become absurd. There's a pair of girls called the Jennas, and they're wannabe tracksuit mafia initiates who made me chuckle at the just supposed hard personas that they put on. Every time they spoke, though, I only saw Marsha the landlady in Spaced, which is probably not the vibe the show was going for. Now, I think for the story that we are given, the 8 episodes, they're too many. Because while the show starts off a bit wonky, it does find its footing pretty quickly, and it becomes rather intense. And then it begins to go off the rails. I mean, there's still a lot of tension that's sustained because of the circumstances that our characters find themselves in, but it also starts to feel drawn out and ridiculous. The narrative does regain some of the urgency, and it does find the plot again towards the end, but that also makes the conclusion feel a bit rushed. Now, I enjoyed the ride and the energy that's created as the show nears the finale because it does become pretty exciting. I mean, everything is culminating with all of the pieces coming together in a race to protect. Now, the lead in this ensemble is a character named Wren, played by Amelia Clarkson. Now, I like how she's a rougher character. She has a streak in her that can become explosive when pushed, and that unpredictability leads to some exciting interactions. Because she is tough, she doesn't elicit as much sympathy as maybe the character deserves. But that's mainly because we get the sense that she can handle herself and doesn't need anyone to swoop in and save her. Now, I like, though, that her life isn't uncomplicated, that she's got baggage that makes her more dimensional as she tries to fight against her upbringing or maybe even her impulses. Now, the show wouldn't be complete without some romantic angles. And for me, the cutest one is the one that's made up mostly of flirting. There's a shyness and innocence that surround a pair of friends. And their dynamic, it's one that I rooted for because of how awkward they'd be towards each other. Now, probably my favorite character, though, is one that doesn't gain prominence until later in the show. Jaya is a computer nerd, and I love that despite being initially shunned by the group, she rises above that and becomes a huge asset. She also interjects little bits of entertainment Easter eggs, making her even more likable for me. And what helps to make this series both engaging and interesting is that each of the characters has some sort of emotional baggage that makes them ripe for the app and its nefarious designs. I mean, so whoever may be affected by the app, it doesn't feel forced, and it seems realistic that they would also be a target or a victim. That being said, though, there is a massive amount of predictability within the premise of the story. Once it's established what could be happening with at least a small degree of certainty, the rest of the plot, it becomes very obvious. I like that the show's still able to instill some surprises as it goes along, but for the overall trajectory of the season, I think you'll see it all coming a mile away. Now, something that I really enjoyed in this is the soundtrack. There are so many songs that are remixed and recorded by new artists, giving a whole different spin on the original song. One was the Barbie song. I mean, it's slower and haunting, turning a bright and cheery pop tune into something much more foreboding and even sinister. So overall, Red Rose is engaging and intense when it's focused on solving the mystery of the app, and when the narrative examines also the nuances of friendship. The show falters, though, by taking too long to move the story forward, especially when the overall arc is predictable. The acting's decent, with several characters created to be dynamic and charismatic, especially when they showcase some complexity. I don't think this is going to become your new favorite binge or become the talk at the water cooler, but if you're looking for a decent thriller that has some excitement and a twisted premise, you may want to check this one out. There's also a mid-credit scene at the end of the last episode, so if you're enjoying the show, don't miss that. There's sex, no nudity, a ton of profanity, and some very brutal violence, including sequences of suicide. I give Red Rose 3 out of 5 couches. So have you seen any decent thrillers lately? I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.